The rain tapped softly on the iron balcony rail, the kind of gentle southern storm that felt like the sky itself was holding its breath. And as I stared out from the guest room of the Westbrook estate, wrapped in a monogrammed robe I didn't ask for, I realized I was more of a guest in this family than I had ever wanted to admit. That day should have been simple, just a family reunion, just a gathering. But everything changed the moment Margaret called for everyone's attention in the drawing room. What she didn't know was that I had already seen the message on Thomas's phone. That morning, the one that said, "She deserves to know, especially now." I didn't understand it then, but I would soon. Oh, I would. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where our amazing viewers are tuning in from. And if this is your first time here, welcome to a channel that brings you the most intense real-life inspired dramas. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss a story that hits where it hurts and heals where it matters. Now back to the storm inside that house. Back to the moment I stood in the hallway, invisible to the rest of them, clutching the letter opener I found in a forgotten drawer. Not for violence, but for answers. Because deep in my gut, I knew something was about to happen. They didn't want me here, not really. I wasn't born into their money, their legacy, or their so-called Southern grace. I was just the girl Thomas brought home one Thanksgiving, the one who became his wife too quickly for Margaret's liking, the one who wore hand-me-down pearls instead of diamonds and painted for a living instead of managing wealth. And yet, here I was about to witness a family tradition unfold, one that would rip everything apart and reveal exactly why the Westbrooks never considered me one of their own. I should have known something was off the moment Margaret insisted on the formal attire for what was supposed to be a casual family reunion. I stood at the top of the staircase, watching the chandeliers flicker in the reflection of the polished mahogany floors. Every surface so pristine, it almost felt sterile. The drawing room was filled with Westbrooks and their close friends, people with double-barreled last names, trust funds, and that particular Southern smile that never quite reached the eyes. I wasn't family here. I was a visitor. Welcomed just enough to be polite, tolerated enough to not make a scene. The fireplace roared despite the humid spring air, and Margaret stood before it in a tailored navy blue dress, her pearls glowing like tiny nooses around her neck. "Attention, everyone," she called, raising a crystal glass with the confidence of someone used to commanding rooms and bending them to her will. As you all know, every generation of the Westbrook family passes down not only our values, but also something far more tangible, something treasured, something earned. That's when she motioned to Thomas, my husband of just under 2 years, who stepped forward, carrying the Westbrook heirloom box, a velvet-lined antique chest I had only seen once, tucked away in the estate's library. I remember touching it with reverence, wondering if someday that necklace might be mine, wondering if, despite everything I had truly become, a Westbrook. Margaret's voice echoed through the room again. "Today, we honor tradition and announce the next woman who will carry this legacy forward. Our future matriarch, the bearer of the Westbrook name and heritage." I felt Thomas's eyes on me, then a fleeting glance that didn't hold warmth, just tension, as if something was clawing at him from the inside. I waited for him to say my name. I waited for Margaret to smile at me with grudging approval. I waited for any sign that I wasn't just playing house in someone else's family. But then Margaret smiled at someone else. "Please join me in congratulating Claire Hastings," she said. And a tall, poised woman with honey blonde hair stepped forward draped in cream silk that clung to her like it had been designed for this exact moment. Claire. A name I'd only heard in passing, usually dismissed, with "she's just an old friend from college." My heart dropped into my stomach as Thomas opened the box and lifted the heirloom necklace, the Westbrook sapphire, a piece so valuable. It had been appraised for nearly $500,000. I tried to breathe, but my lungs refused. Claire turned to face the crowd, her eyes never leaving mine. And then came the real blow. "Thomas and I are expecting," she said softly, placing a perfectly manicured hand on her stomach. Gasps rippled through the room. Margaret beamed like a queen who had just orchestrated the perfect coup. "This child," she declared, "will carry the Westbrook legacy forward. It's only right that Claire, as the mother of the next heir, receives this family treasure." I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I just stood there gripping the railing so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every eye in the room turned to me, some with pity, others with smug satisfaction. Thomas couldn't meet my gaze. His jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. He didn't explain. He didn't deny it. Claire looked at me with the kind of look that says, "You never belonged here, and now you never will." I felt the world tilt. My ears buzzed with the sound of blood rushing. My marriage, my dignity, my place in this family gone shattered. Handed over to a woman who had clearly never left Thomas's life, no matter what he told me. Margaret didn't look at me. She didn't need to. Her message was clear. I was never supposed to be part of this family. I was just a detour, a placeholder. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly stumbled down the stairs. But I forced myself to walk slow, deliberate steps. Across the room, past the whispers, past the stairs. Past Thomas, who finally muttered, "Emily, please let's talk." But it was too late. My heart had already broken, and I refused to let them see me bleed. I made it to the foyer, my heels clicking on the marble like gunshots, and I walked straight out into the storm. Rain poured in sheets, soaking me instantly, but I didn't care. I needed the cold. I needed something to numb the white-hot humiliation searing through every inch of my body. I made it to my car, slamming the door, and for a moment, I just sat there trembling, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror, mascara, running eyes, red lips parted in disbelief. My phone buzzed. "Thomas." I ignored it. Again. "Thomas." Then a message. "Emily, I didn't want it to happen this way. Please come back inside." I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. He didn't want it to happen this way. He had months, maybe years, to come clean. And Margaret planned every bit of this, from the guest list to the inheritance announcement, down to Claire's perfectly timed revelation. This wasn't an accident. This was an execution. The heirloom I once thought symbolized unity now felt like a weapon, a symbol of power used to exile me from a life I had built with love and trust. I couldn't go back to that house, not now, not ever. But as I sat there soaked and shattered, something shifted inside me, not just pain, not just betrayal, but a spark faint, but real. I whispered to myself, "They think I'm gone. They think I'm done." And in that moment, I knew I would never let them write the final chapter of my story. Not without a fight. I didn't remember the drive to Aunt Caroline's house, just that I arrived sometime after midnight, still drenched, still shaking, with my phone long since silenced in the glove compartment. Her porch light was always on a small rebellion against the darkness, and when she opened the door, still in her old plaid robe, holding a steaming cup of chamomile, I didn't have to say a word. She looked at me, really looked at me, and simply said, "You look like your mother, the night she left that place for good." That was the first time I'd heard anyone mention my mother and the Westbrook estate in the same breath, not since I was a child. I didn't know what I'd come for, exactly comfort maybe, or just somewhere I could fall apart without an audience. But what I got instead was something far more valuable: truth. Aunt Caroline, my mother's younger sister, had once been the family's legal advisor until she walked away from it, all over differences no one ever explained to me. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not since Margaret told me she was not welcome at family events. But now, as I sat on her worn floral couch, wrapped in an old quilt, sipping hot tea with trembling hands, I realized Caroline might be the only person who could help me make sense of everything. I told her everything. What happened at the reunion, the heirloom, Thomas's betrayal, Claire's pregnancy, and for the first time in hours, I let the tears fall. Caroline listened in silence, her eyes narrowing at the mention of the heirloom being given to Claire. They gave her the Westbrook sapphire, she asked, her voice tight. I nodded, confused. "Why does that matter so much?" I asked. Caroline stood, disappeared into her study, and returned with a dusty leather binder, the kind filled with documents that had been ignored for decades. "Because that necklace never belonged to the Westbrooks," she said. "Not entirely." She opened the binder and showed me a stack of papers: marriage certificates, wills, land deeds, and, in the middle, a black and white photo of my grandmother, Lillian Grace. She was the original owner of the sapphire, Caroline said. The necklace was part of her dowry when she married Charles Westbrook in 1947. But it wasn't his to claim. When she passed, it should have gone to your mother, their only daughter. But instead, Margaret had it locked away, claiming it was family property. My breath caught. So technically, it's ours. Caroline nodded slowly. Your mother never fought for it. She hated that world and left it behind. But legally, Emily, you have a claim. And now that they've given it away publicly, it's possible to challenge it. I didn't know what to think. I came here broken, humiliated. Now I was being handed not just a path forward, but a weapon. A legal and symbolic weapon that could unravel the very foundation Margaret built her power on. The next morning, I started digging. Caroline showed me how to access the county archives online, how to request copies of specific documents, how to follow the paper trail buried beneath layers of family tradition. I learned that Margaret had restructured the Westbrook estate years ago, folding personal assets into a family trust to avoid taxes and to consolidate control. But in doing so, she'd violated terms of Lillian's will, which stated that personal heirlooms were to be passed directly to her natural descendants. That included me. For the first time in days, I felt something close to hope. But it wasn't just about the necklace. It was about reclaiming my voice, my place, my dignity. I wasn't some accessory Thomas picked out to look good on paper. I was part of this family's history, whether they liked it or not. In between legal research and scanning through old family photos, I began preparing emotionally. Every time I thought of Thomas, of his betrayal, of how he couldn't even look me in the eye as his mother handed over my family's heirloom to another woman, the pain flared up again, but alongside it came a resolve I didn't know I had. This wasn't just revenge. This was survival. This was about standing up to people who thought they could write me out of the story they were rewriting in real time. Caroline offered to help me file a formal petition to reclaim the heirloom and demand an audit of the trust. But I wasn't ready, not yet. I wanted them to feel safe to think I was licking my wounds somewhere far away, powerless, and irrelevant. I needed time to gather evidence to quietly build my case. I started with emails, Thomas's old messages to Claire, a few of which I still had on my laptop from when we planned our wedding and shared devices. Most were mundane, but one thread buried under the label. Event planning held messages that suggested they'd never actually stopped seeing each other. She'll never suspect anything Claire had written in one, especially if you play the dutiful husband a little while longer. I screenshotted every message. I contacted a private investigator. Caroline knew someone discreet. I want to know everything about them, I told him. Where they go, who they see, how they're spending family funds. I didn't want to just reclaim my inheritance. I wanted to know how deep the lies went. And I was willing to wait. Wait and watch. Because what they took from me wasn't just a necklace or a name. They took my trust, my future. And I was going to take something from them in return, something they valued more than any gemstone. Their control, their image, their reputation. I wasn't coming back for scraps. I was coming back for everything. It didn't take long. Before they knew, I was digging. 3 weeks after I left the estate, I received a certified letter from the Westbrook family's legal counsel, an icy formal warning that I was no longer authorized to access any Westbrook property assets or information, and that continued interference with private estate matters would lead to legal action. I sat at Aunt Caroline's kitchen table, the letter shaking in my hand, wondering if they thought threats would scare me into silence. But Caroline just laughed, her eyes gleaming with something like pride. Typical Margaret, she said, pouring herself coffee. Threaten first, cover tracks later. That's when I realized they weren't as confident as they seemed. If they truly believed I had no claim, they wouldn't be threatening me. They'd be ignoring me. Still, the pressure escalated. 2 days later, Thomas showed up not at my door, but at the community art center where I used to volunteer. He waited outside in his car like some penitent lover in a movie, except this wasn't a movie, and he wasn't there for love. I spotted him through the window and debated walking away, but curiosity and anger got the better of me. When I walked outside, he looked almost relieved, like he expected me to slam the door in his face, but hoped I wouldn't. "Emily," he began. Voice low. "Can we talk?" "Just 5 minutes." I crossed my arms standing in the doorway, refusing to step any closer than I had to. 5 minutes, I said. "Make it count." He looked thinner, paler, his expensive clothes slightly wrinkled, like someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. "Look, I know I screwed up. I never meant for it to go that far with Claire. I didn't think—" He trailed off, then tried again. "I didn't think you'd fight back like this." That sentence told me everything I needed to know. He didn't come to apologize. He came because he was afraid I'd uncover something he couldn't afford to be public. "What exactly are you so worried I'll find Thomas?" I asked. His face tightened. "You don't know what you're getting into. The heirloom, all of it. It's more complicated than you think. Margaret's not going to let this go. She'll ruin you if you keep pushing." I stepped closer, my voice sharp. She already tried. And I'm still here. Thomas hesitated, then pulled something from his pocket, a check. "This is from me," he said. "Not her. Walk away, Emily. Take this and start fresh. You don't need any of this." I didn't even look at the amount. I tore the check in half and let the pieces fall at his feet. "You're right. I don't need this," I said. "But I want the truth. And I won't stop until I have it." I walked away before he could say another word. The very next day, the private investigator Caroline had hired called with an update. He'd tracked down an employee of the Westbrook estate, a groundskeeper who'd worked there for decades. Apparently, Margaret had recently had a portion of the estate's old library sealed off, claiming it was undergoing renovations. But the employee remembered that the room in question contained a locked cabinet, one Margaret never allowed anyone to touch, not even staff. He'd once seen a bundle of old legal documents stored there wrapped in cloth with Lillian Grace's initials. My grandmother, Caroline, and I drove out that night. It was reckless. It was emotional. But I needed to see for myself. The estate was quiet, most of the family away. At a fundraiser in Charleston, according to the investigator, the groundskeeper who owed Caroline a favor from years ago let us in through the back. My hands trembled. As I pushed open the library door, the smell of old paper and lemon polish heavy in the air. We found the cabinet just as he described, tucked behind a curtain and half covered in dust sheets. The lock had been replaced recently, Margaret's doing no doubt, but Caroline produced a set of old keys from her coat pocket. "Charles never changed the lock," she whispered. The cabinet opened with a soft click. Inside were stacks of files, ledgers, and envelopes. We pulled them out carefully, searching for anything that could prove my rightful claim. And then I saw it. A yellowed envelope addressed to my daughter, Eleanor, my mother, written in elegant script. Inside was a letter and a copy of Lillian's original will, one that predated the version Margaret had submitted to probate decades ago. In it, Lillian explicitly stated the Westbrook sapphire was to pass to her daughter, and if Eleanor could not or would not claim it, then to her eldest granddaughter, me. It was undeniable, legally binding, and buried. As I stood in that dim library holding the fragile piece of paper, I felt both fury and clarity. Margaret had lied. She had stolen my inheritance, manipulated the family trust, and tried to erase my place in the family. But now I had what I needed. Not just the will, not just the paper trail, but the truth. And I was ready to use it. Not just to reclaim what was mine, but to take down everything they built on a foundation of lies. The Westbrook Annual Charity Gala had always been Margaret's crown jewel, an event where Savannah's elite gathered under twinkling chandeliers, sipping champagne, while quietly jockeying for influence and admiration. That year, it was being held at the historic Riverside Pavilion, an opulent venue overlooking the water with glass walls that reflected the Golden City skyline. The guest list had over 200 names, judges, business leaders, politicians, all of whom held the Westbrooks in high regard. Margaret would be there, of course, holding court in her signature navy silk gown, wearing the Westbrook sapphire around her neck, like a symbol of power she believed no one could challenge. What she didn't know was that I was coming too, and I wasn't coming alone. I arrived in silence, stepping from the car in a simple black dress. Elegant, but understated, the kind that wouldn't draw attention until I wanted it. Beside me was Caroline carrying a slim leather case containing the documents we'd retrieved from the vault, my grandmother's will letters and photographs, along with a certified legal notice we'd prepared earlier that day. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with anticipation. I wasn't here to cause a scene. I was here to end one. The one Margaret had started decades ago when she buried the truth to protect her name. As we entered the ballroom, heads turned, conversations paused, and I felt the heat of 100 eyes, some curious, some cold, and many stunned. I hadn't been seen publicly since the reunion disaster, and my presence now was a challenge, a signal that I wasn't going away. I spotted Thomas at the bar drink in hand jaw, tightening the moment he saw me. Claire hovered nearby, her hand on her growing belly, eyes wide with confusion. And at the center of it all stood Margaret, surrounded by admirers, smiling like a queen about to give another speech. As if on cue, the band stopped playing and a hush fell over the room as Margaret took the stage. Friends, family, and honored guests, she began, her voice smooth and polished. Tonight, we gather, not just to support our community, but to celebrate legacy, our legacy. She touched the sapphire at her throat, and the room applauded politely. It has always been the mission of the Westbrook family to honor tradition and ensure that our values and treasures are preserved for future generations. She smiled directly at Claire, who beamed in response. I stepped forward, then my heels clicking on the polished floor, each step cutting through the silence like a drumbeat. Margaret, I said, my voice calm but amplified through the wireless mic I had discreetly taken from the AV tech. Before you continue, there's something I need to share with everyone here tonight. The room went still. Margaret's smile faltered for just a moment, then returned. Brittle and forced. Emily, dear, this really isn't the time. It is, I interrupted, because I've spent the last month uncovering something your guests deserve to know about this family, this legacy, and the truth you've worked so hard to hide. I turned to the crowd, holding up a framed copy of my grandmother's original will, enlarged for visibility. This document, I said, was written by Lillian Grace Westbrook, my grandmother. In it, she clearly states that the family heirloom, the sapphire necklace currently worn by Margaret, was to pass directly to her daughter, Eleanor, my mother, and if she could not accept it, then to me, her only granddaughter. This necklace was never yours to give away, and the legacy you speak of was built on deception. Gasps echoed through the room. Caroline stepped forward, distributing copies of the will and the legal notice to key guests, attorneys, trustees, and board members, tied to the Westbrook Family Trust. I turned to Margaret, whose face had gone pale beneath the harsh lights. For years, you've manipulated this family-twisting tradition to suit your narrative. But it ends tonight. I've filed a formal petition to reclaim the heirloom and challenge the trust's management. And as of this evening, your actions are under review for legal misconduct. Thomas tried to intervene, stepping toward me. Emily, stop. You're embarrassing yourself. I looked at him with icy calm. No, Thomas. I'm revealing who you all really are. You betrayed me, lied to me, and tried to buy my silence. But I won't be erased. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the final piece, a recording of Thomas and Claire from a recent meeting captured by the private investigator. Their voices played clearly through the speakers as guests listened in shock. Claire's voice. After the baby's born, we can finalize everything. Margaret said, Emily won't fight back. Thomas's voice. She's gone Claire. She's not strong enough to take us on. I faced the crowd. They thought I was weak. They thought I'd disappear. But tonight, I'm taking back what's mine. Not just the necklace, not just the inheritance, but my voice, my name, my story. Applause erupted, not polite, not hesitant, but real. Some guests walked out stunned and murmuring. Others surrounded me, offering quiet nods and words of support. Margaret stood, frozen, her mask shattered as Caroline approached and calmly removed the necklace from her neck. It's time, Caroline said. Time for this to go where it belongs. She handed it to me, not as a trophy, but as a symbol of truth reclaimed. I left the gala that night with my head high, not as a victim, but as the woman who refused to be erased. The Westbrook name would never mean the same again, and I had just rewritten its ending. In the weeks that followed the gala, the ripples of that night spread faster than I could have imagined. The Savannah Gazette ran a headline the next morning that read, Westbrook, Legacy, Shattered Family, Heiress Exposes, Generational Fraud. From there, it was picked up by regional news, then national media, a Southern dynasty undone by one woman's determination to speak the truth. Margaret tried to do damage control, issuing a carefully worded press release, calling the event a deeply personal misunderstanding. But it was too late. The Board of Trustees overseeing the Westbrook Family Foundation announced a full audit of the trust, citing concerns about mismanagement and concealed assets. For a family that had thrived on secrecy and spotless appearances, public scrutiny was the ultimate reckoning. Thomas lost everything, not just the family's respect, but also his job at the architecture firm, which dropped him after donors and clients began pulling out. Claire left Savannah within days of the scandal breaking, moving back in with her parents in Nashville, pregnant and very much alone. I never heard from her again, and I never needed to. As for Margaret, the queen of Savannah society, her empire collapsed brick by brick. Her invitations to exclusive events dried up donors, distanced themselves, and former allies turned cold. The necklace was no longer around her neck. It was with me, but I didn't wear it. Instead, I placed it in a local history museum with a small plaque, the Westbrook sapphire, once hidden. Now, returned. It was no longer a symbol of control. It was a testament to truth found and lies exposed. Some family members reached out quietly in the aftermath. Distant cousins, old friends of my mother, even Charles Westbrook's brother, who apologized for what he called decades of silence. I didn't need their apologies, but I listened. Because every time someone acknowledged what had happened, it reclaimed a piece of the dignity they had tried to strip from me. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't vengeful. I was simply free. Aunt Caroline and I grew closer than we'd ever been. She became my mentor, my anchor, the person who reminded me that walking away from toxic legacies isn't weakness, it's survival. Together, we launched the Grace Initiative, named after my grandmother, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting young women facing legal battles against family abuse or financial manipulation. The first fundraiser was held in the same venue as the gala, just 6 months later. This time, I stood on stage, not as a silenced wife, but as a woman who took her life back and used it to lift others. When I cleaned out the apartment Thomas and I once shared, I found a small box of letters I'd written to him during our early years, notes filled with love plans, dreams. I didn't cry. I didn't burn them. I simply placed them in the trash one by one because I wasn't that woman anymore. And I didn't need to keep pieces of a life that was built on lies. For the first time in years, I looked at my reflection and saw someone I respected, not because of a name or a title or a necklace, but because I had fought back when it would have been easier to disappear. And I had won not just the battle for my inheritance, but the war for my soul. Some victories are loud, messy, public. Others are quiet, felt in the peace that comes after standing up for yourself, in the silence that follows, after those who tried to break you are finally gone. In that silence, I found everything I ever needed. Not their approval, not their wealth, just the freedom to be exactly who I was meant to be. It's strange how peace doesn't arrive, like a storm loud shaking the earth. No real peace slips in quietly, like morning light filtering through an open window. Soft and sure, reminding you that you've survived the worst of it. That's how it felt 6 months later, standing in front of the museum exhibit that now housed the Westbrook sapphire, its silver setting gleaming under a glass case, no longer locked away by secrets, no longer wielded like a weapon. Visitors paused, reading the plaque about its history, its misplacement, and its return. Most of them didn't know who I was, and I liked it that way. I didn't need recognition. I just needed truth to have a place in the light. I'd moved into a small craftsman-style home in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Savannah, a far cry from the cold luxury of the Westbrook estate. My art studio sat in what used to be an old garden shed, now filled with light color and the kind of silence that heals. I painted again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Each canvas was a reminder that creation can rise from destruction, that we are more than what we lose. Sometimes I thought about Thomas not out of longing, but out of wonder. How someone can have everything and still choose betrayal. Last I heard, he was working in Atlanta trying to rebuild what he'd thrown away. Margaret, too, had faded into privacy, her social empire dissolved. I didn't wish them harm. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had something they never truly valued: peace of mind, self-respect, and a life untouched by their control. The Grace Initiative became more than a nonprofit. It became a mission. Women from all over reached out with stories of being silenced, dismissed, and manipulated by powerful families just like I had been. And each time I shared my story, not for attention, but for connection, I realized the real inheritance I had gained wasn't money or property. It was purpose. On the 1-year anniversary of the gala, Caroline and I stood together in the museum, watching visitors pass by the exhibit. She handed me a small envelope worn at the edges. "I've been holding on to this," she said. "Wasn't sure when the right time was." Inside was a note from my mother, written years ago, before she left the Westbrook estate for good. In it she wrote, "I hope you never let their world define you. Remember, our strength isn't in what they gave us, but in what we protect: our name, our truth, our dignity." I held that letter close to my heart, tears welling, not of grief, but of deep healing gratitude. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned gold, I sat on my porch with a glass of sweet tea, watching the world go quiet. No headlines, no courtrooms, no drama, just the sound of cicadas and the steady hum of life moving forward. And I smiled not because I won a battle, but because I came home to myself. I learned that peace isn't about forgetting. It's about knowing exactly what you've been through, who tried to break you, and choosing to live fully anyway. I learned that some legacies aren't worth inheriting, and some truths are worth everything. And I learned that the most powerful thing you can do when they try to write you out of the story is to write your own ending instead.